Today we're taking a look at the 85-inch Sony Z9K Master Series 8K. Now this is a different video. This was done in Value Electronics store, so it's not a quite full review, but I did get to bring my own content, my own devices, brought my equipment to take measurements and so on, and still got a good look at the TV. Now there are going to be reflections on it throughout this video because it was in the showroom, which is quite bright. I also got to do the Sony X95L while I was there, also 85 inches, so I will have a separate video for that. And then after both of these are released and you've seen them, I will have a live stream going over more in-depth measurements and discussion between the two TVs. But I will have some basic measurements throughout these videos, but for all the in-depth stuff, I'm gonna have to do a live stream and talk about it on there. You'll be able to find links to the other video and the live stream in the description below, and I should remember to put them in the end card at the end of this video. Okay, so starting with the Z9K in SDR, at max brightness, we're getting a full field of just over 850 nits and a peak of around 3100, so that's over 3000 nits in SDR. That is incredibly bright for SDR. This is also the Z9K's strongest aspect, and the reason that you would consider buying the Z9K is its brightness ability in SDR. Now if we measure in HDR, we also get a very nice 850 plus in full screen, and then in peak we see up to 3600. Now here's the thing, this is in windowed measurements. I also checked using a luminance pattern that's based on what it can do in real content on a normal sized HDR highlight, and we can see that it's closer to the 2000 nit range for peak. And then if we increase the APL, or average picture level, so it really has to brighten up a lot of the screen, then we see it staying in the 1700s for peak, and that peak highlight can dip down to around 1000 if the rest of the image is also very bright. So while the Z9K is a very bright TV, I do want to rein in that expectation a little bit of the windowed measurements versus what you're actually going to get. A lot of this has to do with local dimming, reducing its ability to get bright as it's trying to suppress blooming, as well as ABL and general power limitations. Also, a lot of people are confused about how luminance actually works in HDR, and a, say, 3000 nit TV can be dimmer than, say, a 500 nit TV in HDR, because that is only telling you how bright the highlights are supposed to be able to get, not the overall general image. That has to do with the EOTF tracking. So now the Z9K tracks EOTF very well, so the image that you get in HDR is fairly accurately represented. And then if you were to compare that to another display that's not accurate and has a lifted EOTF, that other display will appear brighter. Even though the highlights won't be brighter, the general image, the midtones, shadows, and so on would be brighter from that lifted EOTF. It's only in SDR content where the higher nit level will actually translate to a brighter overall image in the content. Now coming back to the Z9K, one of the downsides is you can see the blooming in general content, even in this very bright room. And with this bright room, with all the reflections, we do see there is rainbow reflections across the screen. So you will need to decide if that works for you or not. Color accuracy is very good out of the box. Skin tones look natural, and it will improve with an actual calibration, however, but they are definitely very good out of the box, as you would expect on a TV like this. If you are interested in seeing the measurements and how accurate it is fully, be sure to check out the live stream where I go into that in more depth. But for now, we're going to go through the settings. First, I am showing why not to use the Cinema preset picture mode. It has live color and contrast enhancer on by default, so we're going to use custom. Now if we go down to custom, and we see that the brightness is just very, very high. So if you are in a darker room, you're going to want to set the backlight brightness to around an 8 to 10. Try to match it to what's comfortable for you in your room. Even in a typical normal bright room, around 35 should be plenty. That's the default. And a gamma of -2 would be 2.4, a gamma of -1 is 2.3, and a gamma of 0 is 2.2. I'd say for most, just set it to -1. Auto local dimming, you can set it too high if you do want to try and suppress some of the blooming, but it is more accurate and gets brighter with medium. Peak luminance, you can have off and it still be very, very bright at 35 or so brightness. Again, it just depends on your room, your environment, and if you are getting this TV specifically for its SDR brightness capability. Color temperature, you want to make sure it's in Expert 1 or Expert 2. They're both the same without a calibration. Reality creation, I like to set that to auto, and then your noise reductions, you can either have off, low, or auto, depending on what you like. Smooth gradation, I do recommend on low. Now motion is subjective, so I suggest you play around with these. I would put it into custom. Personally, I would suggest smoothness 1 and clearness 1. Clearness is the black frame insertion, and smoothness is your motion interpolation. Now this TV does not really get any dimmer with clearness 1, so that's why I would say you can try that out. Cinemotion, I do recommend on low or off. Having it on high can make soap opera effect visible or cause stutters in certain content. Now, on this panel, the white balance was too warm or too yellow, so setting it to red gain -3, green gain -2 got it to D65. Based on other Sony LCDs, that's in the ballpark of what I typically see, so you may want to try that out and see how it looks on yours. Alright, now switching it over to HDR, we pretty much don't need to touch anything. We're going to leave it on gradation preferred for the tone mapping. Brightness preferred will cause it to clip earlier and raise the EOTF and be less accurate. For accuracy, you would want it on gradation preferred. The local dimming, again, if you want to try and suppress some blooming, put it on high, otherwise leave it on medium. And then peak luminance needs to be on high and brightness on max for HDR. Everything else is going to be tied to the custom picture preset. So if you change anything, it would be different in SDR then. And then with Dolby Vision, we have bright and dark. We're going to use bright because dark will shift the white balance, which we don't want. And while Dolby Bright will over brighten the EOTF some, setting it to gradation preferred will help with that. Setting gamma to -1 can also help with that. However, if you're buying this TV, chances are you want it for it to be brighter. So I think most of you will just want it to be in bright left alone. Again, the local dimming, that's going to be up to you. Medium's going to be brighter and more detail, whereas dark can suppress some of the blooming some more. The rest of the settings, more or less the same. When it comes to the noise reductions, it's kind of the same as SDR and HDR. You decide based on the content you're watching. You're going to have to try it depending on the source. So a cable box probably would want it on auto. A Blu-ray player, for example, you're going to want to turn it off. And when it comes to the gain settings adjustments, that is per input. So once you do it once, it'll apply to all of the picture modes. So now under the basic settings, there's a few things we're going to check. So just go to the general settings menu, and we're going to go down and make sure under power and energy that energy saving is turned off. Now when you do your initial setup of the TV, it will prompt you if you want to turn that off. So you probably did that already. From there, we're going to go back and go up to the channels and inputs, and then down to external inputs, and we're going to change the HDMI signal format settings. So pretty much for most devices, you're going to want enhanced. If you do have a cable box, you may have to use standard for that. It just depends on the cable box. For HDMI 2, 3, and 4 is where you can enable Dolby Vision by the port or disable it. So with port 4, for example, you can see if you want 4K, 120, or 8K, you got to pick that or Dolby. And then port 3 and 2 kind of works like the other 4K Sony TVs. So you pick enhanced or Dolby. Now on the Xbox or on the PS5, during the HDR setup, we're going to set the black screen on both to 0 or black, as far black as it can get. And then on the brighter ones to 1600 nits. Which on the Xbox you can pull both bumpers and triggers and it'll give you a readout. On the PlayStation, you're going to go to 19 clicks from the bottom. There is no exact 1600, but that gets you close enough. Now as far as the TV and game mode, you pretty much just copy everything from custom, except the clarity and motion menus will have less options, but that's okay. So reality creation I put on auto, smooth gradation still on low. Under motion flow, you can put clearness on for the black frame insertion, or you can have it off. This is up to you and what you like. And for those of you that think this is going too fast, please feel free to use the playback speed setting on YouTube to change the playback of the video to a slower speed, or just pause as you're going through. If I try to go very slowly through this, then people will click off and not watch it. So moving on from there, we're now going to look at some content and looking at some dark shadowy content or dark content with bright objects like this scene from John Wick 2. And as stated earlier, this is in a bright showroom, so there is lots of ambient light and reflections and light hitting the screen. And even in that scenario, we are able to make out some of the blooming effects or haloing effects from the bright objects in the darker areas as it's transitioning zones, something that should be used as a selling point. There doesn't appear to be any real 8K content coming anytime soon either, so focus on this TV for its brightness capabilities more than its resolution. Now, there is a possible argument that interlaced content may look better on 8K, but I didn't have anything like that with me or time to check that, but that is something I plan to investigate further in the future. But there's plenty of tests out there that show at a typical normal seating distance relative to the screen size that 8K is not really that much more visible than 4K. The cutoff for human vision would actually be around 5K, so there's a slight gain to be had, but really you're not going to take full advantage of 8K from a normal seating distance, and I would consider a normal seating distance to be 1 foot away for every 10 inches of size. So on this 85-inch display, you'd be sitting about 8.5, maybe 8 feet away, and at that distance, you're really not going to see any difference between 4 and 8K. Now, I didn't get much time for gaming on it, but there doesn't appear to be any glaring gaming issues. 4K 120 VRR, everything seems to be working with local dimming, so no complaints there, just like any other Sony LCD with the XR processor. So moving on now to the final comments about the Z9K. Again, this is not a typical review where I get to live with it for a while, but I have seen it a couple times now, and being able to get the full measurements and go through some various content, it is what it is. It's a very good Sony TV with fantastic gradation control and very, very good brightness. Overall color accuracy, shadow detail, anything that you would expect from Sony is there like expected, and there really aren't too many complaints other than there is significantly visible blooming in dark scenes with bright objects. I think that's pretty well known at this point. It does not do the best at suppressing the blooming. For that, you would either, one, go OLED, of course, because then there would be none, or look at the X95L. So be sure to check out that review when I post it, and the comparison stream when that comes up in the near future. So subscribe for those and keep an eye out. Thank you all for watching. Hope this helps, and I will see you again soon.